This is The Wilderness and the Wellspring, a podcast about the difficult times when you want to give up on your creative pursuits and the beauty of the act of creation. I'm your host, Jeff Lunt. This is episode 11. Will you ever be noticed for the creative work that you do? If any of you have ever heard the phrase, build it and they will come, or, seen the old movie Field of Dreams, you'll probably be familiar with this idea that it's easy as a creative person to fall into this trap of believing that if you just have a good idea and you make that thing become a reality and you share it with people, that people will just automatically love everything you're doing. Unfortunately, it's not that easy, I'm afraid. We can all point to things that we think are incredibly good examples of art. It could be film, interactive media, music, painting, whatever. But what becomes apparent over time when you look around and wonder why you're putting all this time into creative work and nobody seems to be noticing is that there's actually a huge number of people out there doing the same thing as you, and most of them you've never heard of and probably won't ever hear of them. I talked a little bit about this in the episode on insignificance and facing insignificance. This was episode 7. It's a big world. There's a lot of people out there trying to do creative things, and you're not automatically going to be seen just because you exist. It's a hard thing to accept, or at least it was for me. This can lead to a lot of self-doubt. You think if I just make a thing, build it, share it with a few people, it'll automatically take off. I've also heard this thinking in a form that I would hear a lot when I was doing like a startup with somebody years ago. And in that world, you meet a lot of other people trying to do similar things, start a business or whatever. And the number of times I heard somebody come up to me and say, I have the next, multiple $1 million idea or whatever, without describing what it is they were doing or anything, it makes you realize really quick that it's very common for people to believe that if they just have the idea and they start building it, that it will automatically be awesome. Life doesn't quite work like that. You have to tell people you exist. You have to tell a lot of people you exist, and most people, even when they hear what you have to say, probably won't care. In the business world, telling people that you exist has a name. It's called marketing. Something that a lot of artists and creatives don't like to do. They have the skills, they've gone to school, they've developed the talent, they practice all the time, whatever your particular creative medium is. But it always seems easier to make a living doing your creative thing by just getting a job on someone else's project, even if what you would really love to be doing is your own thing. You got to get out there and tell people you exist over and over and over again. This podcast, in a lot of ways, is a way for me to share that with people. My overall goal with this podcast is to share some things with other people that are struggling to have a creative life in addition to having a working life. But I know I've met a lot of people, and I've fallen into this trap myself of just believing that my brilliance should simply be recognized just because I've toiled away on something. Another part of this that I found to be true for myself is that I was not aware until much later in life just how much I was driven by the desire to be recognized. Now, I've always done creative stuff for its own purpose, but I used to think that I was some kind of person who only did creative work for the love of the work itself. And what I've found over time, and it's took me many, many years to realize, is that as I get older, that's more and more true. I'm able to spend time on doing the work itself just for the work's own sake. This podcast is included in that. I don't expect to get 1 million followers or subscribers or whatever on social media. I have no illusions that that's ever going to happen. I don't think it ever will. And that's okay. But I'm out there and I'm promoting the podcast, and when I have updates to share on my own creative work, I tell people about it. I record something like a podcast episode, or I post something on YouTube or post about it on Twitter. And I will also, like a normal thing a business would do, even though I'm not my own business, I spend ad money to get that message out to people. Sometimes people think that that's sort of cheating, that real artists should suffer in obscurity and wait to be discovered and pulled into the limelight. But the thing is, even if that's how you get your big break of being recognized or reaching a broad audience, is through someone else identifying you as great at what you do, I guarantee you that person is then marketing you and telling people and trying to get your name out there. So, at some point, it's important to get comfortable with sharing what you're doing with people, putting it out there. In fact, it's critical that you get very comfortable with being vulnerable and being out there in front of people, which can be a little scary. It's going to open you up to a lot of feedback that you're really not going to want to hear. Most people either are indifferent to what you do. In fact, that's actually most people. The most vocal people that will give you feedback are going to fall closer to one end of a spectrum or the other. One end of that spectrum could be people who love your work, although out of everyone who sees your work, that will be a small amount, and that's okay, and it's actually normal, so it's nothing really to worry about. The other vocal group, of course, will be the detractors, people who don't like what you're doing. They openly doubt what you're doing, or they might mock you. And, that exists too, and it's very difficult at times to develop the sort of thick skin, or better yet, to simply not really care what the haters think. It doesn't take a lot of effort to tell someone that you think their thing sucks. It takes more effort to give someone a compliment and to be positive. And if you think of it that way, that simply from a level of effort thing, I think that's part of why it's so much easier to get negative feedback than positive feedback. There's an element to it. That's not all there is, but there's something to that. So get comfortable telling people that you exist. Get comfortable knowing that you're going to have to tell a lot of people before you find even 10 people who really care that much. You might get lucky, don't get me wrong. You might post the right idea in the right place at the right time. Getting lucky does happen, but it doesn't last, right? You can't be lucky forever. At some point, you gotta treat it like the effort that it requires. You gotta promote yourself to some degree. And then ask yourself, the reason you're doing the creative stuff, are you doing it for recognition? Is your fear of not being recognized, or your fear of being ridiculed or mocked, keeping you from putting yourself out there? Or it could be other things as well. But it might be worth some reflection. I knew in my case, at least, it was worth some reflection to consider just how much of my motivation for a given project came down to imagining what it would be like after everybody gets to experience the thing that I built, and they all love it, and they're just there's an outpouring of support and compliments, and wow, look at this thing you did, it's so great. I have to say that to an uncomfortable degree, I was motivated by that dream of being seen, when in reality, even the most famous people you can think of outside of the circle of art that person is in, or outside of the country that person lives in, there are actually very, very, very few people who are known across a country or across an entire genre or internationally, and that's it's just the norm. When I was talking to my friend Kyle on episode 4 about some of his filmmaking experience, we touched briefly on how the vast majority of actors and filmmakers and directors and that sort of thing are really just working people that just do a job in that industry that is very much like a job you might have in an office. It's a lot of work. It's not a ton of recognition in terms of getting your name out there or being known. And most people that work in the industry do it as just a regular job. And that's all it'll ever be. And that's okay. I mean, I write code for a living, and you could say that developing video games, indie video games, is a good chunk of writing code, and that's true. But that's not all there is to it. So, good luck out there. Hopefully you'll get some recognition and be able to find a place where you can balance asking for and accepting feedback and moving forward with what you're doing simply because you want to be doing it. So until next time. This has been the Wilderness and the Wellspring podcast. You can find me on Twitter at Jeff Lunt Games. It's because my creative pursuits are creating indie games on the side. You can also share this podcast and blog with anyone you know that might find it interesting. You can find me on Substack at wildernessandwellspring.substack.com. And I just wanted to say thanks again for listening. See you next time.